think they call stupid, but when they say it's not that name, it's just a little handful.
Yeah, that's always the
They
same.
are not.
I was a kid, as president of stealing fund. And then when they found out they were absolutely wrong, everybody on the board that said they're sorry.
No, that's the way it goes.
Steve, how you doing?
Hey, boss,
So
how are
when
you?
do you think this?
Great.
When do you think the sun's going to be ready to rock and roll?
How you doing, sir?
Maybe another,
Couple weeks.
maybe a month.
That's good.
Yes, you do, actually. Good evening. I'd like to call the meeting January 12th, 2015 for the Bonita Springs Fire Control and Rescue District to order. Please stand for an invocation followed by the pledge.
We'd like to pause for a few moments of silence in honor of the one fireman this month that has lost his life. Dear God, we come tonight and we give you thanks for the blessings which we have, and we pray that you'll be with the family, this one that has lost his life as a firefighter. And Lord, we always ask for protection of those that serve here in Bonita, that you'll watch over them and their family and keep them safe in all that they do and the way they serve, and thank you for their commitment. Lord, I pray as we begin a new year that you will watch over, you'll give wisdom, grant us the insight that's needed to lead this community. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Need approval of the regular board minutes from December 1st, 2014.
I so move.
I second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Under one motion for the financials, the December 2014 and current expenditures, the acknowledgement of December 2014 financial report, and the acknowledgement of wire transfers and transfers between accounts.
I so move.
I second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
We have quite a few presentations this evening, so let Chief.
First, we'd like to start with the presentation of retirement of Christopher Grant Wells for 13 years of service. Is Firefighter Wells here? Oh.
Bathroom.
Okay. Anyway, Grant Wells has served this district for 13 years admirably, and he has since then retired. And we just wanted to honor his service. And I think the Vice President Telford was going to present him with something. Is that correct, Wint?
Yes, sir.
Want to move that down and go to the
Yes, sir.
annual service pins, and we'll do that?
We'd also like to present, the district would also like to present Deputy Chief Frank Giuliano, a 25 years service pin. Everyone here knows Deputy Chief Giuliano. His service to the district has been integral to where we have come from and where we are today. Additionally, I see Battalion Chief Taylor, his 25 years of service. Battalion Chief Taylor was a lieutenant who I worked with, was actually one of my first bosses. And coming up through the ranks, Todd has gained a lot of respect from the troops and the men of this district, and he runs A shift now, right? A shift, and he provides a shift with excellent leadership. And I'm proud to say that Battalion Chief Taylor has served admirably for 25 years, and I'm honored to give him his service pin this evening. Next are the 10 years of service awards. We have quite a few. Firefighter EMT Terry Bonnell, firefighter paramedic Shane Frost, logistics officer Dave Glenn, firefighter paramedic Michael Koshlap, firefighter paramedic Scotty Lyons, and firefighter paramedic Michael Mendez, firefighter paramedic Alan Saruchar. These men have achieved a milestone of 10 years of service to this district. I just know when I turned 10 years, it was a very important date, and it's shown their dedication to the community and to the people they serve here in Bonita Springs. So I'd like to say thank you, and if you'd come up front if you're here, please.
Now we can move back to Christopher Grant Wells.
Yes, sir. I think I'll turn it over to President Brown. And who would you like me to turn it over to, Brad?
Local 3444 Vice President Telford, we would just like to recognize Firefighter Wells' 13 years of service to the district, show him a little token of our appreciation. We're going to miss him, and we're sorry we couldn't stick around a little bit longer, Grant, but good luck with everything. So come on up.
Well, while you guys are up here, I just wanted to say a couple things about firefighter Wells. Grant Wells has endured some hardships on this district, but every day he came to work, he gave 100% effort in everything he did. He was an outstanding medic, probably one of the best we've had on this department, and I'm sure he contributed to a multitude of lives that he was a very big part of saving throughout his career. And Grant, I just want to tell you thank you, and the community thanks you for your service too. So.
Next order of business, some Phoenix Awards, right?
Yes, sir. I'm going to turn this over to Deputy Chief Scott.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Our next presentation is for the Phoenix Award. The Phoenix is the most prestigious thing we give here at the fire department. I've seen a lot of them here, sitting in the audience, attending meetings, and I never get tired of the reminder of what it means. What a Phoenix Award is, for those of you who don't know, it's when our crews or responding emergency crews respond to a cardiac arrest patient. For whatever reason caused it, they show up and the person has no heart rate, no pulse, and they're not breathing. So they are clinically deceased. And because of the actions and interventions of the emergency responders, that person survives and walks out of the hospital. It's an amazing, amazing thing. So I go on about it a little bit because it's a pretty cool thing, to say it plainly. The people in this room, whether you're a commissioner working on a budget, the chief and his staff working on training issues, maintenance, all the issues with these buildings, the inspection department, public education, it's a reminder of the reason we're all here. We all work towards saving and protecting lives and property. So I like to remind everyone here, because of the efforts of this district and everyone in it, to give us the equipment, the training, and all the pieces and all the resources. These people survived because of all of us. Mainly they survived, in this case, because of the crew that showed up. But they wouldn't be able to do that job without the rest of us here. So this Phoenix was from April. Sometimes it takes us a little while to track the person and make sure they're okay and they survived and they're doing well. So on April 22nd, Engine 23 out of Station 3 responded to a cardiac arrest, along with Medic 13. They received the call at 6:55. They went en route at 6:56, and they were on scene in 3 minutes from the time they left the station. Amazing. With Medic 13, when they showed up, there was a bystander doing chest compressions. Now, we have been promoting through some of our classes here bystander chest compressions only. That's the new issue with the American Heart, is just chest compressions. The common factor that we're finding in many of these survivals and saves is that someone has initiated CPR on scene before we show up. So I take this opportunity to remind anyone that's listening, anyone in the audience, it does make a tremendous difference when you initiate CPR in the field. All right, it keeps that blood circulating, that oxygenated blood, to the vital organs, for instance, the brain, to keep them until we show up. You still have to call 911, and that's the first part of the system. And then when we show up, of course, the care continues on to the hospital, and hopefully you have a positive outcome on a more regular basis like we have tonight. So they arrived on scene. There was CPR in progress by a bystander. Our crews, along with, again, Lee County EMS, Medic 13, took over CPR. They hooked up the cardiac monitor. They assessed the patient. They took all the information they got off that and determined the electrical activity that was actually going on in the heart at that time. They treated appropriately. They gave the proper medications, and they had an amazing outcome. So I want to give some kudos, and we're going to in a second, to Lieutenant EMT Bradford. If you would come up to the front of the room, please. This is Lieutenant Bradford's 5th Phoenix Award. That's 5 of these. Firefighter paramedic Juvert Calero. It's his first Phoenix. Is that correct, Juvert? First? Awesome. Firefighter EMT Mark Simon. It's his 3rd Phoenix. And also, not to be forgotten, from Lee County EMS, arrived with our crews. So we all treated this patient, our crew and them, and they have to take the patient to the hospital and continue treatment all the way there. So vital part, of course, this whole program and this whole system that goes all the way to the hospital. And the 2 on the Medic 13 that night were paramedic Mike Masaccio, who was not present, and EMT Eric Vasquez.
This is the award that we have. We usually hang a plaque up made such a difference in all our citizens' lives and the lives of their family and the children. Thanks again, man. Appreciate it.
Congratulations again. Next item on the agenda is old business. Does anybody have any old business?
Yeah, I just have a question for Deputy Chief Scott. I just want an update on the boat situation.
Since the last time we talked about this at a meeting, I actually don't have a lot of information. We're still waiting on Bay Harbor to, it's in their bylaws, and we're trying to find a way through the bylaws to use a ramp there without being an owner. So I think they found an owner or two, possibly, that would give us permission, but they have to, they're dealing with the attorneys right now and see if they can find a way through the bylaws or change the bylaws so that we could somewhat, I guess, sublease it from the owners.
Okay, just want the
So,
rest of the board to
yeah.
know.
So that's, we haven't forgot them. I check in with them just about weekly, and we don't have any additional information at this point.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Commissioner Forbes? Anything? Commissioner Murphy? Commissioner McCourt?
Pardon me?
Any old business?
New business?
Old business.
Old business, no.
Well, that moves us on to new business. We start with you.
Start with me. Okay. Thank you. I apologize for being tardy. I guess my watch is a little slow today. I asked for some time to talk about the annual report because I think it's important, and it particularly is
I think
our
that,
image.
excuse me, I think that's under Commissioner's business on the agenda.
Oh, okay.
Under item number 6. This
Okay.
is any new business that we need to discuss among the board. Your items for Commissioner's business are
Okay.
under item 6. You have anything? Okay. Anything?
Nothing.
Okay. Let's move on to the chief's reports.
Yes, sir. First, I'd like to say that our Toys for Tots program was a astounding success. We served 364 children. We had 42 volunteers from the community with 7,500 toys distributed. I would also like to say that we had a spaghetti luncheon for the CERT members, the volunteers. They did a fantastic job. And I don't know if anybody sees this room during the Toys for Tots, but it is loaded up with toys that we give out to the children. It's a fantastic opportunity. So, additionally, I'd also like to say that Jessica LaForge is now the trustee for the General Pension Fund, and she's taking the place of Mrs. Moore in preparation for her departure. I would also like to say, I would request that, we have our fire truck that's being built and should be finished in, I believe, at the end of March, April. We have 2 trips that are slotted to go see the fire truck. The first trip we're estimating should be at the end of this month and the beginning of February, if I'm correct. And then the next month. The first one, we have in the 3 positions, I'd like to send up some of our technicians, meaning I would like to go to one of them, meaning myself, plus our EVTs, so they can look over the specifics of the fire engine, any of the technical aspects of it, and then that's what we call a pre-paint. And then the second trip is for a final, in which the whole truck is complete, and we do a final inspection on the truck. We have arranged, in fact, Assistant Chief DeWitt arranged for 4 people to go on one and 3 on another. However, I would like the board to ask the board for an opportunity to create a 4th position and pay for a 4th position, if the board would like, to send a commissioner on each trip. I think it's important at least a commissioner or representative should at least go on the final trip to see the final product before we take delivery of that. So I would like to open that up for discussion and then obtain a motion, if I could, for an extra trip.
Would you like a motion first?
A motion and a second, and then we can discuss it.
I make a motion to add that additional trip for a commissioner in the fourth space in that second trip.
Yes, sir.
I'll second that.
Okay, now we can have some discussion on it.
Do we have any interest for that second spot?
Well, I definitely want to go.
Good point.
I would-
Are you interested?
No, no.
I'm interested, I just got too much going on in my personal life to leave town right now.
I want to at least go on one of them because of my background. I want to make sure it's what I believe it should be.
Well, we just need a motion and a vote to approve the position. We can pick who goes later, correct?
Well, I don't think we'll have a meeting before we go up on the first one. So if it pleases the board, we could authorize a commissioner's position on the first trip, and where Commissioner Casilla has showed interest can go on the first trip,
That's fine.
or the second, whichever
Whatever
one.
one you deem you want me on.
Okay.
I'll go with your expertise.
So we'll authorize one position for one trip.
Let's do a roll call vote on this.
Right now, the motion is for 2 spots
For one spot for each
trip.
trip.
Aye.
Commissioner Casilla, Commissioner Forbes? Commissioner Murphy?
Aye.
Commissioner Court?
Aye.
And aye for me, too.
Thank you.
Oh, excuse me, where is this fire truck?
It's going to be in a wonderful place this time of year, Appleton, Wisconsin.
What time of the year?
In the end of January.
Thank
Come
you.
with snowshoes?
I always say it's. I think I was expressing it to Commissioner Murphy. It's a big inventory trip where you check things off. So should be very exciting.
The next truck we build in the summer, maybe there'll be more interest in going.
Can we go to Puerto Rico or something?
Okay. I would like to read just a couple brief letters from our citizens. We, the assistant chief and I, went to a function for the Foundation of the Developmentally Disabled, in which the district auctioned off firefighter for a day, in which a member, whoever won the auction, came in and became a firefighter for the day. I think they paid $2,700 for the auction that went to the charity. So we had a bunch of lovely ladies come in here. I think it was, 14?
Yes, 14.
14 ladies came in here, and we ran them through the paces. They got to have a wonderful time. We cooked them lunch with the firehouse cooking that you all have come to know very well. And I just wanted to read a couple really short emails from the day. Dear friends, the gals raving about yesterday, I wanted to thank each one of you, every person in and outside of that building, for an informed, fun, memorable day. It will long be remembered. Please extend our gratitude to all, and should we ever be able to assist you, please do not hesitate to ask. Have a wonderful weekend. Thank you for your support of the Foundation for the Developmentally Disabled. Chief Daigle and Assistant Chief DeWitt, I want to thank you so much for your time you and your firemen and Natalie spent with us yesterday. We are just normal women who were treated royally. From the minute we arrived at 10 o'clock until we left at 2 o'clock, we learned so much, had a ball putting out fires, breaking into cars, and riding high on the ladder. What an experience, one we will never forget. You were all so patient in answering our questions and are also willing to help us. Please convey to Jesse, who's our cook, how delicious our lunch was. He filled our tummies with scrumptious food. He should be a full-time chef. Again, thank you for your donating your time to such a worthy cause. I have a newfound, or should I say educated, respect for all you do to protect us. I feel very safe. So, wanted to thank the district for allowing us to do this for this foundation. They were very, very obviously thankful for what we did for them.
Chief,
If I can
Yes.
expound on this one other
Sure.
thing. They brought their own photographer with them, and he did drop off a DVD to us today. I'm in the process of making copies, and I will make sure each one of you get it. It's about 16 minutes long, and it has little snippets throughout the day of what we did and what we put these women through and how they enjoyed it. Because I did preview it right before the meeting, and I don't think I seen one frown in the bunch. In 16 minutes, all there was were smiles and happy faces in it. So it was a great day.
And that was just a fireman hanging out with 16 women, right?
Yes.
Or
I think
14,
I
14,
think the women had the smiles on their face
Oh,
more
okay.
than the men.
Labor had a good time selling calendars too. So, and one of the reasons why I read a couple of these this is just a small sample of some of the things that happened during the month, just so the board understands some of the things that are going on here at the district. This is a letter from Lieutenant Richard Gonzalez, who runs the fire school here out in our district in our training center. He explains it well in here. Chief, I would first like to thank everyone at Bonita Springs Fire Rescue District for making the training center happen. We know that hurdles have been placed in our path, but together we pulled through. Several people have said that this training center would not succeed and that it is not needed in Southwest Florida. These two classes are the first night and shift fire crew recruit classes to come through the training center here in Bonita Springs, and many people have their eyes pegged on us to prove that the center would not succeed. I am pleased to announce that Wednesday was the recruits' state practical exam. The state proctor tested 14 recruits, 5 in the night class and 9 from Collier County EMS. The day class had 10, but one of the recruits failed to contact the state about his medical form not being dated, so he'll have to test in Ocala in February. All 14 recruits passed their state practical, making both classes a 100% pass, and making Bonita Springs Fire Training Center having 2 classes with a 100% pass rate. The 2 girls in Collier County shift class were the only 2 recruits to score a 100 on their practical. From all of us at Medical Career Institute and all the recruits, we thank you for this opportunity and look forward in making the next class to come a 100% pass. I will be at Fire East on January 21st through the 24th at the State Fire College meetings representing the training center. And the rest is just some logistics. But that was from Richard Gonzalez, the president and CEO of Medical Career Institute. It was an excellent, excellent showing. And one thing we said when we were going to do this fire school, we were going to make sure that our success rate was high, and this is a good start. I wanted to thank the board and the district for allowing us to do that. It's very, very good. Okay, on to my next item. I have the pleasure of introducing our medical director, Dr. Alex Rohde. I'm going to read a little bit of his background and what actual medical direction means to the district and the service we provide. Dr. Alexander E. Rohde has worked as the medical director for Bonita Springs Fire Control and Rescue District since, I believe it's 2008. Right? Let's see. As medical director, his qualifications must comply with state statute 64J, which include Florida licensed MD or DO, board certified in a broad-based clinical medical specialty with demonstrated experience in pre-hospital care and demonstrative active participation in a regional or statewide group involved with pre-hospital care. The duties and responsibilities of the medical director involve developing medically correct standing orders, which we refer to as guidelines, to permit specific basic life support or advanced life support procedures when a delay in care would potentially threaten the health of a patient. Additionally, he develops and implements a quality assurance program to assess the performance of EMTs and paramedics. Included in the evaluation of performance of standard of drugs, medical equipment, system protocols, and procedures, and authorizing the use of controlled substance through the Department of Justice, DEA. The medical director also assumes direct responsibility for the use of cardiac defibrillators and the use of airway adjuncts. He is responsible for the instruction of the DOT-approved training programs for EMTs and paramedics, and approving all testing procedures and all assessment tools to certify all district medical personnel to perform medical practices for the public. Dr. Rohde is a board-certified emergency medical physician and a family practitioner, graduating from the University of Medicine of Dentistry of New Jersey Osteopathic Medicine and John F. Kennedy Memorial Hospital rotating internship in 1980. He has been the attending physician's department of emergency medicine at Virtual Health Systems in New Jersey, Hospital Group of Southwest Florida, Cape Coral Hospital, Lee Memorial Trauma Center, East Coast Emergency Physicians in New Jersey, Sacred Heart General Hospital in PA. And currently, Dr. Rohde works as an attending physician at South Bay Hospital, Ruskin, Florida, Physicians Regional Medical Center, Collier County, and Gulf Coast Medical Center, Fort Myers, Florida. Furthermore, Dr. Rohde has performed as a physician clinical instructor at multiple healthcare institutions. Additionally, he performs duties as the medical director for the Cape Coral Police SWAT Team, Southwest Florida Urban Search and Rescue Team, Iona McGregor Fire District, Cape Coral Fire District, and the Bonita Springs Fire District. Also, he performs medical director responsibilities for the EMT and paramedic program for Southwest Florida State College, formerly known as Edison College. Dr. Rohde? He lacks a little experience.
Just a little. I want to say hi to the new board members that don't know me. Always available if you have questions, things you need to talk about. What I would like to talk about is probably something that's not said very much. And it's not said because most people don't really know about it. Having done this for over 35 years, dealing with the public sector, with police and fire, FBI, U.S. Marshals, I see things that the general public don't see and don't know, and sometimes not even the agencies know. I take care of firemen, EMS, and law enforcement in Lee County in a very small practice I have where I do mostly wellness, hormone replacement type of alternative medicine practice. Why do I do that? I do that because our men and women that serve the public have the same kind of stress that somebody serving our country would have in a war zone. People don't understand that. They say, what are you talking about? They're firemen, they're cops, they sit in their cars and do nothing all day long, or they're sitting in the station watching TV. You don't have an understanding for what it takes. As an ER physician for 35 years, you are on the edge. As a paramedic, as a firefighter, as a cop, you are on that edge. Your adrenal glands are screaming those 24 hours that you're on call. That alarm can go off at any moment. You got to be able to deal with anything that walks through that door. And you have to show you can deal with it. You have to set a tone that you can deal with it. You may have never seen it before, but you have to know what to do because everybody's looking at you. You're the leader. Doesn't matter if you're a paramedic, the physician, it makes no difference. You're the leader and you have to set a tone. You have to be confident, you have to be decisive, you have to have the knowledge, you also have to have the skill. The problem is when you're off that edge, what do? Where do you go for help? Where do you go to regenerate yourself? You can't bring what you've seen home. You see a child suffer a traumatic injury and die, very difficult to go home and tell your wife about it. Most of the time, they don't understand. Or they'll say, well, you know, I don't want to hear about it. Or they'll say, oh, you're still thinking about that? That was 3 weeks ago. So where do you go to release that trauma that you have, to release that vision that keeps going over and over in your head? I find that that's the most underappreciated thing that we deal with as members of the public sector. And I consider myself a member of the public sector. Obviously, by my CV, you see that I serve a lot in the public domain. And I do it because I like to do it. That's what I want to do, because there doesn't seem to be a willingness of physicians to understand what everybody goes through that does this job. So it's very important to me to be there for them. The job is not one every 3 days. I mean, it may look like that on paper, but believe me, these are professionals. They live this every day, even when they're not doing it. This stays with them all their life. I joked with Chief Daigle and Chairman Lohan. I said, you know, so I think Chief Daigle asked me, well, you've been doing this a long time. Like, you know, have you reached that point where you just can't take it anymore? You only work nights. You work every weekend at night. And Gulf Coast, I'm at Gulf Coast now. I have my own company. That's why you see that I've been in a lot of places. I travel around because I like the change. And I said, no. I said, you know what happens? You get so far burnt out that you come around full circle and it's all new again. And they started laughing, but honestly, that's how you start to deal with it. You know, you realize you love what you do. You cannot do this job. None of these gentlemen or ladies that do this job in this profession do it for the money. They don't do it for the recognition. They do it because deep down inside, in their soul, this is what they love and this is what they want to do. They want to serve their fellow man. You're not going to get rich at it, that's for sure. But what you get from it is something you don't get from any other job in the world. So my hat's off to them. I appreciate what they do. I try to support them. I try to help them, educate them, but it's a tough job. I think the most important thing that we can do as an agency is to have an understanding of what they go through. You cannot do this job 24 hours straight. You cannot do this job without some downtime where you can get away from the noise for 10 minutes, get away from the radio and just get your head together, you know, and get yourself set. You won't last. Highest number of MIs job-related are in who? Firemen. Earliest age of death in what profession? Firemen. So it's not an easy job. Any questions, gentlemen? Anything you
That's what
wanna
I
ask?
have to look forward to.
Yes, sir, Chief. Hey, I'm 61. I've been an ER doctor. You know the average lifespan of an ER doctor in the ER is? 15 years. So I'm unusual, and you know that from dealing with me, as the other board members that know me. So,
Maybe you could explain to the new board members, I think all the rest of us know, but a little bit about the training and how the buck stops with you. I mean, you're responsible for everything these guys do, so maybe you could talk about that a little bit.
sure. There's one thing I'd like to recommend to the new guys that don't really know this, that don't really know what goes on, or they may think they do, but they don't. Go spend a shift with one of the guys in the street. Ride in the truck with them. Go to the medical calls with them. You'll see what it's about. And just imagine doing this day in and day out. And think to yourself, well, maybe this day it's not going to be too bad. Or maybe this day we've had 15 calls and it's horrific. I've seen stuff I don't want to see. I'm going to dream about this for the next month. I'd recommend that to you. I'm sorry.
Just
Chairman.
the training and how
Oh, yes.
the
got
responsibility involved in what you do.
As the medical director, and this is true for the medical directors throughout the state who do this kind of work, I am ultimately responsible for every medic in the organizations that I work for, which means if they do something wrong or they make a mistake, it comes to me, comes on me, I get sued. I'm the one that has to answer to the state, to the plaintiff, to anybody else, the regulatory commission, state EMS commission. I'm the one that has to answer to that. So it behooves me to make sure that they're trained above the level that's required by the state, above the level that's required by the county. There's something called common treatment guidelines that the county uses. And this is developed by the county in conjunction. It's supposed to be in conjunction with all the agencies, but in Lee County, it's always been only with EMS, which is unfortunate because we have a lot of really good people in the fire agencies. These guidelines, and I use the term guidelines because that's what they are, they're not standards of care, they're guidelines simply to use by a medic if He's not sure of what to do in a particular situation. He's not sure of the progression of what he's supposed to do. This just helps focus him back on the problem at hand. That's all well and good, but in the medical profession, we call things like ACLS, ITLS, PEP, PALS, merit badges. And most of my colleagues don't believe in merit badges for physicians, because you're a doctor. You think outside the box. You don't follow a cookbook of how to treat a patient, because patients don't follow the cookbook. You have to assess each one individually. It's incumbent upon me as their medical director to make sure that these guys can think outside the box. Now, is that the way medicine is taught to the paramedics and EMTs? Not up until a year or so ago when I took over at Edison. We're trying to meet the national registry standards for EMTs and paramedics, which is a completely different game than what they've been teaching. It requires a different type of mindset, and in addition, the state of Florida will now require passage of that exam to be certified as a medic in this state and as an EMT. So that's a big change. They're national standards, and there's no book they can pull to learn it from. They have to be able to think. I try to incorporate that mindset change, that education change, into what we do in our monthly lectures. They have obligations to do research, to present a case, to present a lecture, a PowerPoint. It's out of their comfort zone. But you know what? When you're dealing with a public and you're at a cardiac arrest, or you're at even just a sick patient, we'll call it, you are in front of other people. You have to learn how to portray and get your wishes across and information across to the people around you, and also to be a leader and to instill confidence in what you're doing. You can't do that if you don't have experience doing it. So I think by doing a presentation, it helps them. In addition, we have cases that we go over. We do QA, but the most important thing we do is when I present them with a case like they were in the field, I'll give them the typical call, and I'll just use an example. You get awoken at 3 a.m. with a complaint of 80-year-old woman who fell. And that's what you'll get on the radio, 80-year-old woman who fell. So I'll say to them, you get in the truck. The fire stations are the most appropriately placed based on the county demographics. You're going to be the first ones there almost every time. And you go to the scene. En route to the scene, give me a list of all those things that can make this patient fall, and what are the consequences? What could they possibly have wrong with them? Now you would say, oh, well, you know, in the beginning, they'd give you 2 or 3. When I first started here, maybe 2 or 3 things, and I'd say to them, seriously? That's all you can think of? It's a heck of a lot more than that. Today, they can give me a list of 40 or 50 different differential diagnoses for anything I give them. That's a great improvement. It shows that they're thinking, that they can take a small bit of information like a physician does. When I'm in the ER, it's almost veterinary medicine most of the time. And they can, with that little bit of information, formulate an idea of what's going on, and then go through this checklist in their head and eliminate things as they examine the patient and get whatever additional history they get. In addition, we have the 100 top, well, they're called my 100 top drugs, that they have to learn over the course of a year. They get tested on it. It's emailed to them. They have to look them up. They have to know these drugs, because a lot of times your patients, they don't know what they're for. They may be on a handful of drugs, and they'll say, yeah, I take these. Well, what do you take these for? I don't know. So if you know what the drug is, you know what it's for. If you have a patient who has altered mental status, they hit their head, or they're demented, and you get called, you can look at their drugs and say, oh, well, he has hypertension, he has atrial fibrillation, he's got diabetes, he's on a blood thinner, oh, he's on a blood thinner, he fell and hit his head, that's not good. This guy's gonna have a bleed. He could be bleeding in his head, and maybe that's why he's altered. So this is information that they learn how to use. This is not something that's taught in medic school. We are in the process of developing critical thinking in our labs at Florida Southwestern. It is the change, because students don't come to us out of school anymore with that kind of skill. They're not taught to critically think. They want you to give them the paper and, okay, this is the test questions all here. This is what you need to know. That's what they want. They don't want to have to look at it and say, well, why do I have to read that whole chapter? And I tell them, you're responsible for everything in that chapter. Well, why? Why can't you just tell me the important parts? I said, because the patient's not going to come in with 3 of those things. You have to know everything in that chapter. Give you an example, I tell them. When I was in medical school, the professor would come in and he'd lecture on what he liked. Let's say it was congestive heart failure. You have 300 pages of cardiac disease, and he lectured on congestive heart failure. What do you think his questions were going to be on? They weren't on congestive heart failure. They were on the other 295 pages that he didn't talk about, but you still had to know it. And in order to be good at what we do, we need to know that information. We need to keep it up to date. We need to continually read, and I encourage them to do that. They get bibliographies with the lecture. I refer to certain textbooks. Unfortunately, textbooks are about 10 years behind. There are certain journals that are good to read, certain types of the merit badge courses I mentioned that are good. Pre-hospital trauma life support's an excellent course. There's a new course that I recommend for all our EMTs and medics to take called Tactical Combat Critical Care. It gives you a whole different concept of how to deal with this active shooter thing, which as a fire agency, you gentlemen are going to be seeing this in the coming few years because we're already doing presentations on this throughout the country. Fire will be responsible for going in and looking for victims. The scene may not be 100% secure, but they're going to have to be tasked with going in and looking for victims, and they're going to have to know what to do with them. And it's not civilian EMS that you do with these people. It's not the civilian medic that you need. You need somebody that understands tactical injuries and how to treat them, because they're not the same as what they're used to treating. So these are some of the things we do. It is very intense. We are a fire EMS agency. You can't do 100% fire and 100% EMS. It's impossible. You have to do and balance what you have with your people and the types of calls you get. So we try to divide it up, hitting the critical points, encouraging the battalion chiefs and the training chiefs, which continually reinforce the process with our people. You have to do that. You got to have dedicated training chiefs to do that. I think that that's the best way that it works. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it did. Very well. Thank you, Dr. Rhodes.
Anybody else questions?
Anybody have any questions?
Chief, it won't be a problem if the new commissioners want to ride along.
They could do whatever they want on this fire department.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rhodey.
Thank
very
you,
much.
Doctor.
Thank you, Doctor.
So, appears Frank's not here. We go to Deputy Chief Scott. Yes, anything?
Hello, everyone, again. I just wanted to give you a quick update on some of the testing that we're doing this month with our air packs. As you all know, some of you were actually on the board when we bought our last round of air packs. I think Commissioner Lohan was. They may be the most important thing that we carry on our fire apparatus. I'm sure you all know this as well. If you go into a structure fire like we had, just a few nights ago, and you take one breath of the smoke, the toxic smoke, especially these days in one of these houses, it can be fatal with one breath. So, with that being said, we conduct testing annually on our air packs, and right now we're doing our flow testing on our masks. This is required by OSHA and NFPA that once a year we do this test, and what it does is each person comes in with their mask, and we have a machine, it's called a port count machine, and it tests the difference between the ambient air on the outside and the particles on the inside. And they go through a series of tests. It's a national standard. So we're in the middle of that. We do conduct that once a year. We purchased the equipment over 10 years ago and do it in-house. In a few more months, we'll do the flow testing on all our air packs. So just giving an update on some of the things that go on, again, that we don't talk much about, and you might not hear a whole lot about that go on a daily, in this case, an annual basis, but it takes some time to get every person, every firefighter through that. So, any questions? Yes, sir.
You say the air packs are 10 years old.
No.
No.
We bought the equipment to test the mask about 10 years ago.
Right, but the equipment's modern. It's up
The
to date.
equipment we purchased in '08, I believe.
And how
Our
long does that
packs-
last
Well,
before it needs to be renewed?
I'd say about 10 years. about 10 years. We're just probably past halfway of the longevity of the air packs that we bought. The NFPA standards come out every 5 years. So what we do is we look at the new standard. The last one was 07. These are 07 compliant. The packs that just got released are 12s. They're always about a year and a half behind when the NFPA standards come out, because then they have to remanufacture and test all the air packs. So we're always a couple years behind. That's why we got the last ones, I think, in early 09 or late 08. So we look at the standards, we see how much changes they've done, and does it warrant looking at buying packs? This last round, there wasn't a tremendous amount of change in NFPA, and by the way, it's not required to purchase every 5 years. You know, you just look and weigh out. So we'll probably make it to the next standard change, I would guess, unless we have a major problem.
And I did want to say, one of the reasons why we started this program is, back then it was a firefighter, Scott, determined that we could save the district a lot of money by doing it in-house. The cost of I don't know if you were going to get there, but the cost of the equipment, well, you can explain that.
Yeah, I was kind of going there and I got off track about buying the equipment 10 years ago. You can have companies come in and they roughly charge for mass fit about $40 per person. So we roughly have 85 firefighters, so you can do the math. That would cost every year. And then the flow testing, we also own the equipment that we've had for some time to flow test the air packs. And that's closer to $100 an air pack. And we have 55 air packs. So that would be an annual charge that we incurred a long time ago, and we do all in-house. By the way, Assistant Chief DeWitt reminded me, the mass fit test, what it's for is to ensure that not only the mask works properly, but that it fits you properly. When people have change of weight, age, and their face structure changes, we have to make sure that the mask seals and fits them properly. Not only can smoke get inside, but if it doesn't fit, it's a positive pressure system, but the air can leak out of the pack faster, which would reduce your amount of time you can spend inside that building. So those are some of the reasons that it's required.
And one of the, also to add to that briefly, is when we have an accident here on the fire department, the very first thing OSHA will do is come and pull those packs and say, are you compliant? Are you up to date with your standards? When was the last time you mass fit test your employees? So it's something that we want to obviously avoid happening in the first place. So thank you, Deputy Chief.
You're welcome.
Chief, can I make one comment?
Yes, sir.
Just to highlight why that's so important, why these packs are important, is back in '98, they did studies on carbon monoxide from fires. And the reason they went back, and they went back another 10 years, was because they had such a high incidence of sudden death in firefighters, cardiac arrest specifically, and they noticed they was occurring from 1 to 3 days after a fire. And when they went back and looked at the actual data, they saw that many of these men weren't in the fire. They were outside of the fire. They didn't have a mask on. They were holding the hose, or they were standing there doing something else. But all those chemicals were coming out right into them. And they were unaware that they were breathing all this stuff in. They were unaware that at some point they would have a heart attack. One of the reasons death rate is so high in firefighters. So they started changing the way you would fight fires. There was no more this fire eater mentality that had been, I guess, a mentality for many years where, oh, I don't need a mask. I can go in and breathe the smoke and I'll be fine. They realized that when they actually went back and looked at the data, all these people were dying from sudden cardiac death, from heart attacks, from smoke inhalation. So I just want to add that.
Thank you, Doc. I do believe that's it, sir.
Okay. Under Commissioner's business, Commissioner McCourt has a couple of items on the agenda he'd like to discuss. You have the floor.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. And I'd like to preface what questions I have here and point out that I'm talking hopefully to the Commissioner Board. Okay? I'm not interested in what these fellows out here think, because I've had an opportunity. I can go and talk to them anytime. What I'm trying to get a feel for is where we're at on a lot of these things. And if you fellows have some of the same questions in your mind that I have, and that's going to be very helpful to me. So I asked them to bring out a copy of the annual report. Unfortunately, this is, we're going to replace this, I'm sure, very soon, but at least it'll give us a point to start at. If you turn to page 7 for me. You'll note that 66% of the calls here are EMS calls, and 6% of them are requests for assistance, and 28% of them are fire and hazardous conditions calls. Later in the report, we're going to point out that 135 calls are hazardous conditions, 135 calls are fire, and another 72 are hazardous conditions. That's about 4 or 5% of the total. I'm questioning what are the other calls that make up this 28% of fire and other hazardous conditions.
What page is the other?
I'm on page 7.
I know, but on the other numbers that you're using, do you know what reference page that is?
Sure. We have fires back on, what page?
I mean, we can
is that?
find it, but it'd just be easier if you have the page numbers.
We had 135, I think, was the number in this year, and last year it was 130, if I recall correctly. Page 19 of the fires. And while we're back there, on page 18, it gives the highlights. And it talks about medical calls. The total is 3,422, and the number this year actually is 3,595, I think. It's gone up another 5%. It shows us that the fire calls were 135. They had gone down, and the request for assistance were also up about 6%. I guess the thing that jumps out at me when I read this as a layperson, it kind of begs the question, why do we call ourselves a fire department? And I'm having trouble in my own mind coming up with an answer to that, and I thought you fellows might have some answers for me.
Well, first of all, our name of our operation is Bonita Fire Control and Rescue District. That's our official name,
Yes. Okay.
which is, from where I sit, that's what we do. We do fires and we do rescue,
Okay.
which is medical and whatever else is involved with that. So I'm not sure that I understand the question about why do we call ourselves a fire department? Well, we do fires as well as rescue, and that's in our whole name. I mean, a lot of people call us the Bonita Fire Department, but our technical name is the Bonita Springs Fire Control and Rescue District.
Okay, so about 2% of what we do are fires. We call fire control, that's the first item you read, right?
Well, I don't know if 2% is correct, but
135 of 5,000. The math comes out to about 2%, doesn't it?
well, I don't know if you're just stating actual fires, house fires and things along those lines. I think the way it's been my understanding through this that a lot of those fire calls are also involved in car wrecks, which are also part of the hazardous material side of which comes under fire control. Like Lee County EMS could not go and extract people, could not secure a scene, so that falls under fire. Those calls fall under fire, as well as just putting water on.
You're talking about automobile calls now.
Yes.
Are those under fire, or are those
No,
under
I think they're
other
under.
hazardous?
I think they're under other hazards.
I'd like to ask the chief, because he
Yeah, the
developed
chief.
this
The chief
report.
should get involved in answering the questions.
Well,
on-
I'm asking you not to involve the chief.
Well, I
Well, we'd
mean,
like to,
but
because
as
this is a
far as
test.
the operational side of this,
I
what
want to see
they,
where you guys are coming from, is what I'm
Well,
trying to do here.
We didn't prepare this report, so I'd like to have the chief explain it, because you're asking for percentages that I don't have numbers in front of me that I can calculate, I can come up with numbers. He does, and I'd like to have his input on it, if you want answers to your question.
I've already had this conversation with the chief.
Well,
is
I'd
what
like
I'm
to have the
saying.
answers
Okay.
from the chief, so I know where I'm coming from. So Chief, could you please fill us in?
Okay. First of all, I'd like to explain something. Greg, if you'd pull it up, please. Most of the statistics that we do are required by the state. So we report to the state our statistical analysis determined by, they set the standard of what and how things are reported, what the names of them are. So if we look at, I have it up, actually pulled up here, Florida Fire 2013 Annual Report. This will be the Florida State report for all fire districts in the entire state of Florida. If you go to page 64, Greg, I'd appreciate it.
Can we put it on this screen?
Yes, we're going to put it over there.
Can you see that? There, page 64. Okay, now what this report is every single reporting agency in the state of Florida. So, if you look at this graph, a summary of statistics of 2013, statewide, that's about 18 million people. 74% of all reported emergencies were rescue EMS. 16% other emergencies, 5% false alarm, 2% total fires, 3% mutual aid. Here in Bonita Springs, our percentage is 67% rescue, which is below EMS, which is below the state average of 18 plus million people. Other emergencies is similar. False alarms, as determined by our district, is 7.5%. So our false alarms are 2.5% greater than what the state is. Total fires, the state, you're correct, statewide, 18 million people is about 2% of the calls. This is all fire departments in the state or districts in the state. Rescue, or the total fires here in Bonita Springs, is 1.8, so almost very close to 2% total fires. So in relation to the responses in the state, the responses here in Bonita Springs are right in line with the overall response matrix throughout the entire state of Florida in every fire district. Now, those are the statistics, how we stack up against.
Excuse me, Chief, but
Yes,
I'm not questioning your statistics. I'm asking a simple question. and
Which
I
question
was
is that?
Trying to get the feel of my colleagues on the board here. If 66% of what we do is EMS and 2% of what we do is fires, why is the first name and our name fire?
So are you just asking us to change the name from Bonita Springs Fire Control and Rescue District to Rescue District and Fire Control? Is that where we're going?
Well, it might make some more sense, yes. Now,
the
I don't know
point?
that that's where we have to go. I'm simply asking the question. I have people come to me, and, we have a lot of people that question the fire department out there, and they say, why do you call yourselves a fire department? What you talk about, what we talked about here today, and all of the time that we spend is about saving lives. It's about EMS. It's about medical. It's not about fires.
Well, I've been doing
And-
this
and
for
what we
6 years,
see-
and I've never had anybody ask me why we call ourselves a fire department. I'm going to be honest
I
with
just don't
you.
understand
All
the
right.
point either.
Sure.
I have no interest in changing the name.
Well, I don't,
I don't think I said anything about changing the name. I just asked the question.
But what's the point? We have more important things to talk about, whether it's fire or rescue or fire. I don't think that's an important thing to talk about tonight. We have
Okay.
things we have to worry about.
All right, I think that answers my question.
Well, I think that you really,
Plug into the mic, please.
I think you've come into the point about why the district has tried and tried to get to have ambulance transport because of the fact we do so much rescue and we are, all the firemen are either EMTs or paramedics. That if we can do that, it wouldn't, forget about whether you change the department's name or not, we're going to be able to provide a better service. So, I mean, I don't know if that makes sense to you or not.
Every fire department in the country, I came from New York, and it was the New York Fire Department. They didn't even add rescue district. They run a lot of medical calls. Where you come from, they run a lot of medical calls. They're traditionally called fire departments, because fire departments are all-encompassing, and do everything under one umbrella.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, gentlemen. You've answered that question. Let me move on to the next one. If you'll go to page 19 then. That's here. We see here again the fire calls, and we see the importance of them, and so on and so forth. My question here was, I'm sorry, I'm on the wrong page. Again, the fire calls were 135, and they are a decreasing item. Hazardous conditions, 72 calls were an increasing item. Service calls, an increasing item. Public assistance calls, and so on and so forth, all the way down. The numbers of false alarms, which is on page 22. We see we do 390 false alarms. And I had a conversation with a couple of the chiefs about this, and I asked the question, how many of the medical calls are originated as false alarms? Excuse me, how many false alarms are originated as medical calls? And they informed me that we don't keep that kind of information.
I don't understand it. Say that again.
How many of these 390 false alarms
They're fire alarms.
originated as a medical call?
Most of those alarms, the lion's share of those, are actual electronic alarms that go off. And I think we covered this at last month's meeting. Deputy Chief Giuliano went over when a call comes in, when an electronic alarm goes off, they roll every piece of equipment in this town until a battalion chief or the first arriving unit decides that they don't need everybody. So it's every time one of those fire alarm that is electronically triggered. It's not.
I understand.
That's an automatic response to assume that the building's on fire. The lion's share of the time it isn't, but as a result of, that's why you have fire alarms in structures, is
So
that
what-
if there is a problem, then you roll those. It has nothing, I don't believe any of those have anything to do with medical calls. That's my understanding.
The rest of you feel that way?
Well, again, what's the importance whether Kim sends out as a rescue call and turns out to be a false, or it's an alarm coming in? I don't understand the.
Well, I'm simply asking the question, can we relate false alarms to medical calls? Do we get false alarm medical calls? And the answer-
My question to you is why? Why are you worried about that? I don't understand.
Now, we actually teach people on the education side to call 911 in a medical emergency, and it's better to have them come and not be needed than needed and not be there. So we actually encourage people, and it's not to pad numbers, it's not to do anything, because sometimes what appears to be a very simple call can turn into something major, and vice versa. So I think that the medical calls and the false alarm calls, from where I sit, have nothing to do with each other.
Okay. This is essentially the answer I got in talking to the chiefs. I said, we don't track that information, so we can't come up with the actual numbers.
Well,
But
I don't know if
said-
there are ever medical calls that are false alarms,
Well, that's good. That's what I'm saying.
because there's nothing to
When I
track.
asked them, would you give me a ballpark of how many they think were false alarms came from medical calls, I said probably little or none, okay?
Or
Now, my
you,
point
or
is-
are you saying that if an ambulance shows up and doesn't transport, because every time an ambulance shows up, doesn't necessarily mean that patient's being transported to the hospital.
Well, I understand that.
So that
That's
wouldn't be a
different.
false alarm, that would be an assessment of the professionals to come and determine whether that person needs to be transported or
That's
not.
an EMS call, and we made it.
Right.
Okay? That's not my question. My question is, do we have false alarm medical calls? And the answer that I got was practically none, okay? So my point is, to get to you, the point that I'm trying to make here is that it's not very legitimate to count the false alarm calls versus the percentage of medical calls. In other words, if you take out the false alarm calls from the total number of calls, you find that our percentage of medical calls goes up dramatically. In other words, when you look at what we do, it's not 66% medical, it's more like 70 or 80%.
But they're
medical.
not listed, the way I read this, they're not listed under fire calls.
Pardon me?
They're not listed under fire calls. The medical calls are separate.
That's my point. My point is that if you look at what we do, and this is what we tell the public back here in this chart that we do, they say we do 66% medical. And I'm suggesting to you it's more like 70 or 80% medical.
I don't
If you
agree.
look at the figures a little different.
I don't agree. We're responding to false alarms. Our men are on the road, they're in danger, we're responding like it's an alarm. The fact that it's a false alarm doesn't mean anything. We're still responding with full equipment, full men, just like it is a fire.
There's been studies done that more firemen
Uh-huh.
get killed answering false alarms than doing active duty, you know, with an actual fire. So, you know, these are things that we have looked at, not just at our local level, but as an industry standard. Everything that is done in this department, we don't just pick numbers out of the air, we don't just pick protocols out of the air. Everything that we do, and everything, I can only speak for myself, everything I've done since I've been here, is I learn, study, go to school, and then try to make some type of an educated opinion. And everything that goes into this is based on fact, not, now, is there a 1% give or take that maybe this should have been over here, that should have been over there? I don't know. That's for the people here that put the numbers together. But I do know, when I look at our annual report and I look at all of the calls and the structure of our organization, both at a state level and nationally, but mostly state level, because we're comparing apples to apples, we are dead center of where we should be, operationally.
That's fine. My point, gentlemen, is very simple. That I think we're kind of fooling ourselves by not realizing that 75 to 80% of what we do, what our business is medical.
Well, it wouldn't make any difference if 90% was medical and 10% were fire. We still have to train and have the equipment, and everybody, if we do one fire a year, everybody has to be trained. So I think we're kind of pulling fly poop out of pepper with the numbers here, because it's like everybody has to be trained. I think Dr. Rohde did a great job explaining on his side what he has to teach everybody, and they have to know whether they use it or not. They have to know how to do it. And again, it goes back to, if we have one fire a year, everybody in this that works for this department has to know how to put that fire out and has to know what the hazards are. So whether it's 90% or 60% or 80%, I don't understand what the difference is. That's where I'm having a hard time with your question.
Okay, you lead me beautifully into my next question.
Okay.
Okay? If you turn to page 15. Wait a minute.
Fire prevention?
I'm sorry. This is my numbers don't correspond here. What page is training on? Anybody know that?
12 and 13.
13?
12 and 13.
My page are out of order here. Oh, here we go. Okay, I'm sorry. Why do we train for what we do, okay? That's basically where you were going, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it shows here that we spend 14,000 hours training for fires, which is 2% of our business. And we spend 9,000 hours training medical, which is admittedly at least 60, perhaps 70 or 80% of our business. Now, if we were in a normal business, we would, as a board of directors, we would be looking at this and we would be asking some serious questions of our employees.
Very simply, from where I sit, there are far more things to learn. I'm not taking anything away from the medical side and what Dr. Rohde does, okay? But after a while, when you learn, and he spends all the time going over the drugs and everything, there's far more to learn, and so much more goes into training for the what-ifs in a fire, okay? Not very many medics that work for Bonita Fire Department are going to die treating somebody. If they make a mistake, maybe the patient will die, but not very many firemen or medics are going to die working on that. Whereas going into any kind of a hazardous condition or any type of fire, there's a lot more to that. And having said that, they don't do it as often. So you have to train a lot more. When you're doing something on a daily basis and every shift, and you're running medical calls and you're doing it all the time, that is training. Whereas with the fire side, they are not getting, your argument is that we don't have that many fires. So because we don't have that many fires, like I said earlier, we still have to know how to do everything for that one fire. So you have to train more on the fire side because you don't have as many opportunities to do on-the-job training. That's why they do fire drills. That's why we have live burns out here, because they don't have that opportunity that they have to learn on a day-to-day basis with medical calls.
Larry, you got a point.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, can I ask the doctor this? You made a statement that you send emails to all the paramedics and they do a lot of reading. Chief, is that time in this report?
Yes, I believe
Okay.
most of it we do record, yes.
Okay, you record their time on their personal time that they do the training?
Yes.
I just want to make sure that was in there. Okay. Thank
We also have webinars, and what I do is my 3 agencies, we share information so that they can look, Iona or CAPE can look at our webinar, we can go online, look at their lectures that their paramedics gave, my lectures that I give. So that's all there. They can, when they're at the station, they can pull up everything. If they missed a lecture, they can pull up the lecture and see what we talked about. I mean, it's part of the training.
Would you agree with my assessment that, not to take anything away, and that's not what I mean, I know what you teach and what these guys learn from the medical side, but is that a fair assessment, how I see it from where I sit?
Yeah, actually, I can relate this to personal experience as an ER physician. If I don't go and do ER medicine for a period of a month or so, you lose your edge. And it's not that you don't know anything, it's just that you lose your edge. You don't have the recognition. Also, what I don't think has been said, I think you may have mentioned it, the fire side is what kills you, not the medic side.
Yeah, I think I did make that point.
Yeah, so the fire side is where you're training, you really have to be careful, because that's what's gonna kill you.
I'd like to say something too, because this is what I'm responsible for, is providing the training for our employees. You have a significant, and when you look at every call, you have a high risk, and some of you may have heard this before, you have a high risk, low frequency call. That's a call that happens infrequent, but there is an extreme amount of risk to the people providing that service and to the public. Then you have a low risk, high frequency type of call. That is what would be your medical call. High frequency, low risk. When you do a high frequency, low risk call, it amounts to less people that are needed on the scene, less, I would say less different variables in the call. In a fire, it's high risk, low frequency, so it's the same as a police officer pulling his gun. Do they need as much training writing a ticket, or do they need to train how to fire the weapon? Because it depends on, simply because you may not fire your gun but once in your career does not mean you do not need to train on it, or doesn't mean you take those guns away. What it means is those are the situations we have to train the most. It's the most intensive, it's the most risky, and it happens the least amount of time. So that is a fact, that the things you do the least of, you have to train the most of, because you don't want the first time you run a fire to be the first time these officers see it. You want them to see it in training. You want the firefighters to see it in training. So that is the reason why we spend an enormous amount of time on hazardous materials fires, any kind of fires, or any of those high-risk, low-frequency calls.
And taking it out of the administration's hands and putting it back on the commissioners, which is where we were going with this, we have an obligation to protect the employees of this district. That's first and foremost, to make sure that they are trained, not just for their sake, but for the people who they're serving sake. And that, as a commissioner, is one of the very important things, and we go by federal and state standards, but one of the most important things that we have to do as commissioners is to make sure that we're sending people in a safe with the best equipment that they can possibly have, and knowing how to use that stuff. And in a nutshell, I believe that this department is run, not only the training is outstanding, we have trimmed this department by 30-some%, and so there's people doing a lot more with less. And I think we've done a pretty good job. I know you don't agree with me, but I think when you really sit down, and I'd be happy, I know we can't do it because of sunshine law, but I would be happy to go over the things since I've been here at 6 years, and I will show you where we have made some significant changes and are still giving what I consider to be the best service there is.
Mr. Chairman?
Chairman
Yes, sir.
Lohan, I don't
This-
disagree with you. You're kind of putting words in my mouth, I think, when you say that. I do challenge you, I do question you, but I don't necessarily disagree with you. And the way we're gonna grow is if we challenge everything. We look at everything.
Sure.
We open up every corner and make the best possible decisions we can.
Mr. Chairman, just a point that,
Let
I'm sorry.
Let Commissioner Forbes go for it.
Well,
He's been waiting.
I had actually two different questions, but they somewhat relate. There are, I'm assuming that there are, like, I think the chief said standards, but that, like, minimum like if I'm a pilot and I'm not flying all the time, I have to still do so much training in the trainer where I can fly IFR and shoot landings and all that.
I'm not flying with you, Fred.
I didn't, you shouldn't. But, so I'm assuming that that contributes to part of how you figure out how much you do. And then the other question I had is for Dr. Rohde, and that maybe I'm asking the wrong person, but it's a little off track, but it relates. If we were to get transport, would that medical training ratio between fire and medical, would it shift any, or would it just stay about what it was? I don't know. That's why I'm asking the question.
There would probably expand, and the reason being is that even though we talk about it in our lectures and, you know, we test for it and we do the ATLS or ITLS, PEP, all those little courses that you have to have for certifications, there's a difference between your initial evaluation of that patient and the time it takes you to get to wherever you're going. So you have to know the progression of the disease process you're dealing with and also what your treatment is going to cause to happen or entail. And the second part of that is because our medics don't make that trip routinely unless it's an intubated patient that they've tubed and given drugs to, they don't see that part of the travel, so they don't have that experience. It's not hard. It's just a progression of the natural disease, which we talk about. The problem is that they don't see it occurring because we're not doing it. You know, so that would just require them to extrapolate that next step, which they all know, they just haven't used it. So there is some training involved. Yes, there might be a little more training on the medical side because we would have a little more to look at, especially with our quality review, with our case review. We'd have more stuff to see. They wouldn't be just looking at that initial presentation and what few things happen while they're on scene with a patient. Which, you know, what happens is they get released to EMS and they transport them to the hospital. Unless, as I said, it's a patient that we tube and then our medic goes with them.
Gotcha.
Commissioner Castillo.
there's just a point here that's missing. An evolution of a fire training procedure takes a lot more time for one evolution than it would would take for a medical training. You talk about just the logistics of setting up a fire in a car, and it just takes hours and hours and hours compared to the time it would take to sit down and talk medical, right?
Yeah.
Correct, doctor?
Yeah, see, the difference is, and it's even more different than that. The difference is that I set the standards that I expect based upon Article, what was it, 0814, 0816, I've forgotten the number. 0816. I can raise the standards. There's basic minimums that are required in the state. I set my standards higher because I want my people to think. I don't want them to be a cookbook medic. Those are the ones, when you mentioned about extra training, we had that kind of mentality. It would take us, years to educate them in how to handle that patient that they should know how to handle already. So that's why we don't teach them that way. That's why we raise what we do to a higher level. That's why my medics intubate patients. That's why they give them drugs. So that they know if they have to do that, they're comfortable in doing it because they practice it every day when they're on duty. Granted, it's a mannequin, but they practice the equipment. Like you talked about fire, you have to know your equipment. If you don't know it, when you need to use it, you're going to screw it up.
To expound on some of the fire training too, we do have standards that we have to meet by the state. You have company training, for example, when you do simply a typical fire scenario, it's a lot more intensive than a medical scenario. We'll use 3 companies in a fire training scenario out here at the training tower because there's a multitude of things that go on in unison together. They're not separate of each other. For example, entry, search, ventilation, that's 3 different crews, plus a RIT team, that's 4 different crews. So that's 4 different crews with 3 different trucks. That's a lot of time spent training. And if you even get more complex and you have to strike a second alarm because of the type of incident it is, that takes 2 more engines and another ladder. So you can see how that could require a lot more personnel and a lot more time to accomplish a realistic goal of being able to handle these specific types of emergencies.
Can I say one thing to the commissioners? Since I've been here, I've gone with the commissioners to the county commission in an effort to get transport. So we have, through the training division, Chief DeWitt, myself, we have ramped up that training already, with the thought that we would be transporting at some point. So, to switch into that gear, it would take very little in terms of the medical side of it, because that's what we have been training for, basically. We thought that that would be something we would already have attained by this time.
Commissioner Murphy?
Mr. Rohde, Dr. Rohde, I've heard it said that our people here aren't quite as well trained as they are at the county level. That's what I thought you might do. Could you give us a little update on where we stand compared to that?
I'd be more than happy to. I have 3 agencies plus Urban Search and Rescue. Dr. Lafferty, who's a good friend of mine, has 3 agencies. He has Estero, San Carlos, and South Trail. Dr. Lafferty and I have a different philosophy than the medical director for EMS. We believe if you train your people, you have them think independently, you'll have a better outcome. They'll be able to handle those situations that require more poise and more skill. To prove this point, we gave our medics a glide scope to intubate patients. EMS does not tube patients. Based on a couple of studies that came out originally of Canada and then out of some of the pre-hospital systems in the country, they suggested, well, you don't have to tube patients if it's just a cardiac arrest, and you can bag them for the first 5 minutes or so. And if you don't get a response, then you have the option of tubing them. EMS extrapolated that into you're not going to tube any patients. So this is where we are today. When we have a patient that needs to be intubated for any reason, it doesn't have to be a cardiac arrest, just because of respiratory distress, EMS will not tube the patient. They turn to our medics at Bonita, my medics at Iona, Cape, Dr. Lafferty's medics, and they say, we can't tube the patient. We'll get fired. Can you tube him and give him the drugs? And that's what happens. So whoever made that statement knows nothing about what goes on out in the field, because I see it.
I agree.
Thank you.
Any further questions on this particular issue?
Let me just move along then, if I may.
Sure.
My emphasis, I think you're beginning to see, is I believe that we are not, or that we ought to be in the full-time EMS business. And I'm questioning, we have a lawsuit right now against the county trying to get that squared away. I understand that. And I just tend to believe in my heart that one of the reasons why we're having difficulty with that is because they see us as a fire department. and for some reason, they think we're not qualified to do that, okay?
I don't
What I-
know
what
if
I'm
that's
suggesting-
never been said in any of the meetings or discussions, both privately and publicly, that I've been in with the county in this particular case of our COPCN. There's never been a question about qualification. There's been a question about circling the wagons and turf protecting. There's been, we've always done it this way, so we're not gonna change. And if you think that you have problems in life, try to change a government agency to do something differently, which we've been trying to do for the last 6 years. But never have I heard in conversations, either publicly or privately, from anybody that we aren't qualified to do it. They think they can do it better, but we think we can do it better, and that's, I mean, that's just human nature. But
You should
I
say
have
so.
never heard an argument at the county level stating that our people can't do the job. They just don't want us to.
Well, my last point, let me make it very simply, and I apologize to you, Chief, because I don't think I communicated to you properly what I wanted on this report. But what I'm really interested in is how many firefighters we have that are qualified paramedics. What's the percentage?
I would have to look at the percentage, but I believe we're upwards around 65%, 65%.
I'm sorry, 55?
65%.
65%?
Around there, I
Okay,
would say.
all right.
I would have to get the specific numbers. but
Well, they're all EMTs you're talking about.
They're all well, everyone's at least an EMT.
Right, and then
65% of 60, what's the number? 65% are paramedics.
And the second question I think I asked you the other day was, is this a requirement when we hire new people that they are qualified paramedics?
No, sir, it is not a requirement to hire a qualified paramedic for the position. However, when we do look at employees, that is a consideration when we go through the hiring process, like what we're doing now.
But to clarify that, they have to be EMT.
Yes.
Well, I'd like to make a motion, if I may. I would like to make a motion that we ask the chief to put together a scenario for us. First of all, I'd like to ask that we require all of our new hires, as a basic requirement to being hired, that they are a paramedic.
Anybody want to second that for discussion's sake?
Yeah, I'll second it for discussion's sake, sure.
Okay, there's a second for discussion's sake, and we've had this conversation many times in budget, and I'm going to ask for help here, but it appears to me, when we've gone over budget, you pay paramedics more than you do firefighter EMTs, okay? And at the level of service that we were at, we didn't need 100% of our people from a dollar and cents from where we sit to be certified paramedics. Am I correct?
Yes, I would like to say in the hiring procedure, it is not mission critical that we have paramedics upon initial employment. In fact, if we do have EMTs involved in the hiring procedure, it expands the pool of candidates, where we're simply not hiring for a certificate, where we're hiring actually the man or woman. So it allows us an opportunity to expand that pool. Now, years ago, I would say that was true. At one point in time in Bonita Springs Fire Department, 15 years ago or so, we would not hire anybody unless they were a paramedic, simply because we just became ALS, and I was one of the first 9 along with Rick, these guys, so I was making overtime at the time. But we do not have a shortage of paramedics. That paramedics is not our issue right now. However, that would be up to the board to decide. From an administrative point of view and an operational point of view, it would not be critical or even necessary to make that a requirement at this time
And
for operations.
I would ask Dr. Rohde, would you, from where you sit and the job you do, would you rather us hire new recruits and you train them to become paramedics versus us hiring a paramedic that already knows everything and he's just going to sit there and go, well, I've already done this, I know that. That begs that question for me.
As I stated earlier, we're changing the program at Edison because there's been some deficiencies in what's come out over the years in the quality of the individuals. In my mind, I'd rather we look for the individual who's got the motivation, who's got the intelligence, who has the poise to do the job to begin with. We can teach him medicine. We can teach him what he needs to know to be a paramedic. I don't think we need 100% paramedics. That's my personal opinion. Now, when you go to transport, you may need more than the current number we have. And remember what I said also, the state is going to be changing the requirements and making them much more stringent and in line with the National Registry. So that's going to put us in a position where, especially with our training that I've already changed, meeting certain benchmarks in the process of training our people. So one of them is critical thinking, which currently is not being taught. They're just given a cookbook and that's it.
I wanted to say to Commissioner McCourt, now, I wanted to be clear on this, that if we have an equal candidate that has the certification of paramedic and they go through our hiring process, of course we would, because it would save the district money not sending them to school, they would already be paramedics at that point. If they were equal and they survived our testing process and did well, then of course we would put emphasis on the certification at that point.
Well, I guess my response to that is I would hope you feel that way. But I also believe that if you are hiring people who have already demonstrated they have the motivation to become paramedics, we're starting out at a much higher level of the quality people, and we're not assuming then that training cost to bring somebody up to paramedics. The next question I would ask, and I think maybe I already have well, I better not. Go ahead.
What,
I
no,
don't
we
wanna
have
change the
to,
subject.
we have an open motion on the
Well, I
floor.
was going to ask a couple questions if I could.
Absolutely.
It would seem to me that maybe you can have a kind of happy medium. It would seem to me that, first of all, you have to be a firefighter, and I believe the better you do on that test that you take, the quicker, more likely you are to be interviewed. So is being a paramedic given extra points so that if you do real good on the firefighting, that exam, and then you also are a paramedic, that you would kind of float to the top?
At this point in time in our district, you can't be an officer without being a certified paramedic approved by Dr. Rohde. So at some point in your career, it will be necessary for you to advance in your career to be a paramedic. Now, I'm saying from an operational standpoint that we have plenty of paramedics.
All right.
And they will all, when they advance into a leadership position, meaning a company officer, in which they're running these calls and are in charge of patient care, they are now required to be paramedics.
All right.
Let me ask you this, because I don't remember. I probably should. But would the starting pay be different for a new firefighter with the paramedic, or would it be after a 2-year or 3-year in a STEP program versus an EMT firefighter? What was the difference in the starting salary? I don't recall that now.
Well, I know. No, from the paramedic standpoint, they get a incentive, and I
Right.
believe the first incentive is
But under the-
200 and.
But under the new tier of the
It's the
contract,
same.
we had rolled that into,
No, the paramedic incentive is separate from
Okay.
salary.
right.
It's an incentive pay.
So
If you
would
look
they
at your
get that
sheet-
incentive pay as brand-new hires, is my question.
Yes, I believe they got to get credentialed first.
Yeah, I can answer that. They don't get paramedic certified
Mm-hmm.
by Benita Springs or me until I approve them. And they don't all get approved automatically just because they're paramedics. Some of them have taken longer to pass the credentialing exam. Remember what I said about the critical thinking? Because they're not taught that and EMS doesn't allow that, it's new to them. So when I give them a case, you know, they think it's in the book here. It's the protocol. They don't understand how they're supposed to take that case and then take the information and put it together and know what to do with the patient. So normally, and this is really true with my other agencies, they've hired EMS people and sent them to fire school. They have not been credentialed. Many of them take almost a year to get credentialed to pass the exam. So,
And the simple question, I guess, is
and they
would
don't
it,
get paid. So.
would it add more to our cost? Would our payroll increase by making it a requirement that everybody be a paramedic?
By the amount of that incentive. But, you know, I would have to go back to.
Would it be cost effective over
I would have
time?
to
I
go
guess that's
back
the
to-
question is, if we pay them more now and we don't pay for their training as time goes on, is that more reasonable than, and having more medics than we need? Is that financially feasible
Yeah.
or responsible to do it that way versus the way we do it?
Well, I would say operationally, we do not need paramedics. I mean, that's as clear as I can say at this point in time. And I would not make a decision on an employee based on their, that particular qualification. We've had guys, like the doc was saying, we've had people who come out of paramedic school take 4 years to get credentialed because they may look okay, they passed paramedic school, but they weren't a motivated employee and can't pass Dr. Rohde's testing. So I don't, to run the operation effectively, to provide a full service ALS department like we do now, it is not necessary to make that a hiring requirement. It's
All
not
right, any-
necessary.
If there's no more further discussion on this, let's vote on this. Let's do a roll call vote. I think the motion is that any new hires from here be certified paramedics,
Yes.
okay?
No.
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 Yes. Thank you, gentlemen.
Can I ask Dr. Rohde a quick question?
Sure.
Am I not correct in saying that like Lee County that has to transport in an ambulance, they usually have one paramedic and one EMT?
Yes, and they've had some issues with that. I'm not at liberty to go into any details,
Yeah.
but yes, and part of what we see today in their practice is related to issues they've had because of that in the past.
So if we got ambulance transport, even if we had a three-person crew, we could probably, without too much work, handle two paramedics and one EMT in an ambulance. We might have to do another hire or some more hires, but not that many. I'm just asking.
It depends on the deployment model that we use. We have some ideas about how we can best utilize our deployment. I think the last number that we came up with is we could provide 3 ambulances without hiring at this point, with the intention that that's under one deployment model, which would take too much time to go into. But there are other deployment models that we would need to hire. However, still the stance would be that we would anticipate that the revenues from the ridership fee would cover the cost of any new employees to provide the additional service. Does that answer your question, Commissioner?
Yeah.
Commissioner McCourt, do you have any further? You have anything further?
No, I'm fine.
Okay.
Thank you.
Commissioner Murphy? Commissioner Forbes?
No.
Commissioner
No.
Stone? Okay, local 3444.
Just wanted to remind the commissioners this Saturday, in conjunction with the department and the city, we're having the, I guess it's not an annual, how long ago was that? We had the softball tournament with the Wounded Warrior softball team. 2011. Happy to announce that they're going to be back this Saturday. There'll be a game at 10 o'clock between us and the Sheriff's Department. And then we'll come back at 5 o'clock. I think the opening ceremonies are at 4:45 or so. And the Sheriff's Department will play the Wounded Warriors at 5 o'clock, and then we'll play them at 7 o'clock.
And that's at the rec center?
That's
or-
at the rec center on Pine Avenue. So we're.
I haven't seen anything written about that anywhere. I knew it was upcoming, but I have not seen that appear on my radar anywhere.
Steve, I signed up to play, so come out and see a commissioner make a fool of himself.
Commissioner, I have seen that. The CERT team was informed
okay.
of it.
Well,
It's a good time. It's very humbling. We consider ourselves honored to have that team come into Bonita Springs because they're on a waiting list. They travel across the country and,
well, I know the other one that we did was just
yeah, it's the same team.
monumental.
The same team, so
That's
Just-
awesome.
pass the word, friends, family. It's a good time. Good cause.
Excellent. Thank you. I don't have any cards for public input this evening, but if somebody,
Pass this on here. Yes, Alex Grant, 11851 East Terry Street. When I was, Dr. Rhodey, when I was a volunteer here from 1987 to 1988, I probably ran about, was on 700 calls, and I remember every fatality. These were accident or fire-related fatalities. I just wanted to tell you, you reminded me of that. Even to this day, 15 years or 17 years afterwards, but you remember every fatality that you go to. I just wanted to mention that for the record. Also, I know I asked this question about in October, I think, or September, I'm not sure, about the incentive pay, and there was a little, not a questionnaire that I proposed to be asked by the commissioners. There are about 35 or so fire departments that are both paid, volunteer, mixed, et cetera, and I wanted to know what was how many had incentive pays for their personnel and how many did not, and I'm wondering if at that time, I believe Commissioner Lohan, you said that you'd look into that.
no, I don't recall saying that, but I do know that the only thing that we as commissioners oversee is our fire department, and whatever the other fire departments do, that's a public records request that you could put in and find out.
I understand that. I was just looking at that as a comparison basis for the commissioners to determine.
When we go through contract negotiations, we always look at the total package, and I will tell you the answer to where we stand locally is we're almost dead in the middle. Out of, I think it was, 12 or 14, or I can't remember how many departments, significant number, and we were right almost on the bubble, not the highest, not the lowest, but we were very much in the median group.
Okay,
And that's total pay, total compensation,
Okay.
not breaking it down
and
to.
I believe that was at about 5.27% according to what I calculated of the total pay package for operating expenses, but that was my own calculation. Okay, well, that was my comment.
Thank you.
Deborah McLean, publisher of the Banana Peel and also city editor. I would like to remind us all that the armed forces, and mostly the Republicans, honor and respect our veterans and armed forces, are able to be deployed, fully trained, fully equipped at the drop of a hat. And I'd like to tie this in by saying George W. Bush, another Republican, after 9/11, contacted Homeland Security, and all firefighters nationwide are our first line of defense. The mere thought that you want to dismantle fire trucks, firemen, and their masks, and all of the equipment that they need as first line of defense because the armed forces are overseas shocks me. And as far as Dr. Rhodey's training is concerned, I'm aware who said that we are not trained. Dr. Rhodey trains our people above Lee County requirements. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Anybody else? Meeting adjourned.